to the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite our best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right. With that, our first item on the agenda. So I do expect Mr. Pfaff.
Looks like he's looks like he's a participant right now and trying to get in. Is that possible?
Yeah, let me just move him to the panelist then.
No, he's gone.
Yeah, he might. I'll give him a second.
There we go.
You there now, Andrew?
Yep, say yes.
We're just going right to the, we're in the minutes, Andrew. So, does anyone have any questions, comments for Jeff on the minutes? Seeing none, I will move that we approve the meeting minutes from June 23rd, 2020. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lisa. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Yes.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Pfaff,
Aye.
and Malinowski, aye. All right, chairman's update. The townhouse engineering that we've talked about the last few meetings is well underway with a deadline of early August that vendor has to return the appropriate materials to John Parent. I have also on the side discussed with the CPC chair, given the uncertainty of if and when we may have a fall town meeting, what they're still willing to entertain, et cetera. And he said once we're ready, they will certainly try to schedule a meeting to listen to the request. Obviously, couldn't make any guarantees of whether they would get through the request, depending on what date, if any, was scheduled for the fall town meeting, but definitely wouldn't sit on the spring just because sort of thing. So I thought that was helpful. I think there will be, based on at least his view, there'll be discussions obviously around the windows and kind of the exterior and a preservation. We'll probably have to go back to BOS to make sure that they continue to understand that there would be preservation restrictions needed if we were to kind of continue to look at CPA as the way of funding that particular project. So more to come on that once we actually get the engineering report. Just as a benefit for this group, the firm that is doing the engineering work was also the same firm that did all of the work around libraries facade restoration that went through town meeting. I believe it was a year and a half ago, that was CPA funded. So they are very well aware of what the requirements would be if that was the funding source that we undertook. Under 3B, membership recruitment, as you all remember, we are actually a 7-person committee. We've had 6 since kind of the beginning. I did send an email to Mark with a CC to Marty Healy as chair of BOS, asking that they start like trying to actually fill out that seat, and not because obviously we've had any quorum issues to date, but I think it's always good to have a full committee, especially as we're really getting into the meat. But I asked that they put a special emphasis on trying to find engineering type expertise. When I obviously look at the makeup of our committee, we've obviously done a lot of work with this group, but I think there's going to be some studies forthcoming and some expertise there that it would be nice to kind of have that sort of additional background to supplement all the working knowledge that's here amongst this group. That was just my own personal opinion, so I welcome any further thoughts, but I thought it was important given we had about a month in between meetings to get them started on that. I honestly don't know, Mark, if you've done anything with that with Marty, but I would continue to encourage, obviously, anyone that's watching the meeting that has that sort of background, if you're interested to apply to the BOS for appointment. And if you aren't watching the meeting and don't even know about it, I'd ask, obviously, Mark or your designee to kind of continue to push that.
Yeah, we'll continue to push that, Jason.
Okay. Any questions on anything else under Chairman's update? All right. Last administrative item before we actually get into Chief Achilles' update is reorganization of the committee. We're in a unique spot because we were only formed 3 or 4 months ago, but typically, for those of you that haven't been on committees before, committees typically reorganize at the beginning of the fiscal year, after reappointments. We obviously didn't have any change in membership, but at the same time, we were technically reappointed until the end of this fiscal year. So I think it's important, I said this when I was originally selected as chair, that we have this discussion every year, and the same would be true for the other 2 officers as well. And we can keep it status quo, we can do something different, but I felt it was the right thing to kind of just bring it forward. So I don't have a particular view either way of where we go, but I'm opening up for discussion.
I would suggest leaving it the same.
I would be fine with leaving it the same, but I think we need to take a look at what we want to do with the clerk piece. Jeff has done an amazing job with the minutes. Kudos to you. You've kind of set an example that's going to be hard for anybody else to adhere to. But it does take a lot out of a member when they have to focus on the minutes. So I'd like us to come up with some other plan, whether we spread it out and everybody take an opportunity to take minutes 1 week, or we try to find somebody to take our minutes, or if someone else wants to step forward. I don't know. I just don't think it's fair to Jeff. I mean, for 12 years, I served and did minutes as clerk on the Open Space Commission. And I know how trying it could be to try to stay involved in a conversation, but trying to take the minutes at the same time. And I mean, Zoom makes it easy because you can go back and watch, but even so, I think we should spread it out and it not be all with one person or find another alternative. Just my 2 cents.
Well, I guess I can't complain if it's only been 4 months and you get 12 years. So
I echo that sentiment, Lisa. And obviously my view would be, obviously we have to have someone on paper that ultimately is responsible for making sure they get done. But maybe that person comes up with a rotation of what we're going to do, unless Mark has some magical answer in the background there of, any town staff maybe in this environment that may be able to pop in, especially given that we're holding these during, I'll call it pseudo business hours, to at least, do an initial draft.
I can send, I could talk with you, Jason, about a list of people or employees who may be available, at least for the time being, who could do minutes. Again, the minutes are taped, or the meetings are taped, so somebody could very easily go in and just do the minutes from that. So why don't we chat about that and see if we can't find someone who's willing to do that for you.
Okay.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there any way we could even maybe get a tax write-off person to be able to take minutes? There's some really good people.
So,
and,
yeah, I really think in terms of the short answer for that is, I don't think we can effectively do a tax write-off program
Okay.
this year. Or we're going to have to find some way to suspend it. I know there's been conversations ongoing with Vanessa and with Pam about that, simply because there's very few things the tax write-off people can do. There'd be very few opportunities, and it would be an extremely limited program, which I don't think is fair to the fairly large number of people who do participate. So good idea, but I just think in practice, it's not going to work.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other thoughts? Is there a motion from anyone?
Well, should we motion for, at least for chair and vice chair, just to keep that as is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate to either, I think there's 3 appropriate motions, either a motion to keep all positions as is, a motion, or we go one by one and go through each of the 3 titles: chair, vice chair, clerk. So,
well, I like the 3 motion and 1, but Jeff, let me ask you, if we keep everything as it is, would you be willing to, if they find someone to take the minutes, just glance them over and submit them?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Or Jeff set up a rotation and we'll
Right.
switch about every 2 months or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, that's totally fine with me. Whatever we think is the most likely approach. I mean, if Mark thinks he can find someone, then great. If not, we can rotate.
Perfect. So I make a motion that we leave, for the forthcoming year, we leave the organization of the board as it was, with the understanding that we're going to look to maybe find staff to help with minutes, and if not, that we'll rotate them.
there's a second.
I'll second.
All right, seconded by Andrew. Any further discussion? And given that Kathy is not here, I'm assuming she wants to continue in that role, but to the extent I inform, if this passes, to the extent I inform her that, and she has decided differently, we'll just revote at the next meeting. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio?
Aye.
Hark?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Pfaff?
Aye.
Malinowski is going to be abstain. So 401.
Jeff, thank you again for the
Welcome.
great job that you've done. We appreciate it.
No problem.
You're setting a very high bar.
That was not the
Right.
intent, but
I'm going to bring Chief Achilles in as a panelist. Chief, you should be in now. There he is.
Good morning, everybody.
How are you?
Groovy.
Morning, Chief.
Good morning.
So before I turn the floor over to Chief Achilles, we have a few items here. We'll kind of go one by one, but the major reason he's here is for bullet 5A, which is the Chief's vehicle that we had voted to push from the spring town meeting to the fall town meeting. I have confirmed with him that assuming there is a fall town meeting, he still is eager to bring that one forward. And I thought it was appropriate, given the conversation we had a couple months ago when he came in with his broader capital plan, that he should come back and focus specifically on this item to start, because I know there was a lot of discussion in that original meeting more around the pumper that did pass at the Springtown meeting. And, given that there's different sentiments on the committee, just wanted to kind of air this one out now, because there's no reason, honestly, to wait until we get closer to the fall town meetings. I don't think the facts are going to change around the chief's needs, right? So it's going to be a matter of agreeing or disagreeing with his needs. I do want to say, well, I did put a possible vote on the agenda, just throwing it out there as we talked. My personal view is not to vote today, because I kind of want to see where the local receipts come in and where the broader town picture is for FY21 in terms of is revenue trending, ahead of where Mark and Brian had projected for town meeting and the promises on the tax rate that were given, et cetera. But I do want to kind of solidify the appropriate timing here, absent financial items, which are obviously outside of the chief's control, and candidly all of ours as well in a lot of instances. So that's at least my view, although I will entertain a motion if we want to formally support or not support it at the end of this discussion today. But that was just, I think, the premise of where I wanted to start is I wanted to stick to kind of the need first and then go from there in terms of does it fit into the actual capital plan. So Chief, why don't we start with your vehicle, then we can kind of go through the other items I had on the agenda that you and I have kind of previewed.
All right, good morning. I figured let me start with a little background on our apparatus and vehicle inventory. When I reviewed this in the fall, I looked at our replacement schedules, and I think we've talked a little bit about it with the apparatus, but I think I want to reiterate that our staff and support vehicles have a 10 to 12 year replacement schedule. That's based on mileage and use, also the technology, the function, the purpose of each of those vehicles. So when I designed the initial replacement program, this year actually should have been, or last year, should have been our pickup, which is a 2008. It's a support vehicle. We use it to haul trailers, pick up equipment. It's more of a utility vehicle. It gets a lot of use. But looking at the bigger picture of how we do things here, I decided to change that and move up the replacement of our Explorer, which is currently was my vehicle. Now we've assigned it to the prevention officer for multiple reasons. So this year should have been a pickup truck. So as we move forward, I think that needs to be a consideration as we decide what to do with the replacement schedule. Is we're going to start backing up if we don't do a replacement this year in the vehicles, because it should be 2020, and then the Explorer in 2022, and now the Car 27, which is an Expedition, should be in about 2026 or 2027. So again, the decision to move up actually has been, since our last conversations, has been solidified with that decision based on what's been happening at the department. So let me talk about think of it as a emergency response vehicle that's assigned to either myself or the prevention officer. As you know, and Lisa is familiar with this, the fire chiefs are required to live close. So I do take the department vehicle with me home. I live in Marlboro, and it's not just a support vehicle that allows us to me to drive back and forth to work. It's an emergency response vehicle. And even during the day, I respond to emergencies based on certain levels or requirements, or if we're short on staff. So it's not a drive to work commuting vehicle. Think of it as an emergency response vehicle, especially where, again, the fire chief is required to live close. So I do come back after hours and I do emergency responses. So the function and purpose of this vehicle is an emergency response vehicle that also is critical for us to coordinate incidents and manage incidents. It's set up and designed, and it's equipped with electronics, radios, and workspaces that typically an SUV wouldn't be normally equipped with. So that's integral, and those are designed that way. And that's the other reason why, after about 10 years, the technology, the electronics, the communication system, plus these vehicles often idle. A good example is last Friday, I responded to the gas main break at the 30 and 85, and it idled probably for a good half an hour. So again, it's not getting, just because the mileage isn't high doesn't mean it's not getting used. The other thing I think is important is that since we last talked, we've had a number of incidents where I was home or I was out of the area, and we've had need for a support and command and communication vehicle. One of them was the large area search that we had off of Southwood. And actually, after even I responded, we used both our assets to the best of their ability to manage and coordinate. We've also had, again, 2 gas leaks. We've had a number of small fires and some serious accidents. And of course, some of our isolated storms. And that's the other reason why the focus of this vehicle is not a car, but something that can go on all weather, has some ground clearance, so that if there's downed small trees and it's difficult to navigate through town, we have that capability. So I think it's the way we're designed. It was very important for me to make sure we had 2 vehicles of equal capacity and capabilities, much like our approach on the fire engine. So I would be concerned if we keep on putting this off. It is a distinct need. If for some reason the decision is to put it off, then I would reintroduce, trying to put in at least the replacement of the pickup truck. I think at this time, we could make the pickup truck last another couple of years, but I don't want to get into a scenario where we start log jamming the replacement of the vehicles. So that's the approach, and I would be welcome to answer any questions on my approach to this vehicle.
Jason, if I may.
Lisa, I just want to ask Chief one clarifying item, and then Chief, when you say you're going to push off, like if let's just say there was not support for your chief's vehicle, what year would you reintroduce that pickup? Just so we have that in the back of our mind as we go through this discussion.
Next year.
So basically, spring town meeting for an FY22 expenditure.
Right, and then okay. Just so you know, the 2013 Ford Explorer that we're trying to replace now, that would also start to get up into that area of that year or the next year.
Okay, sorry, Lisa. I just wanted to make sure that was on the table before we start discussing it further.
Okay, no, just a quick question, Chief, for those that on the committee that may not have been involved in the budget discussions and everything. Can you just touch briefly on the vehicles that you have on your capital list and what their use is? I mean, for instance, what specifically does the pickup truck maybe get used for? Just so maybe there's a better understanding of the need that you have to make sure that all bases are covered.
Okay, so the very high level obvious pieces of equipment, we run about 20 pieces of apparatus or vehicles or 2021. So 2 of them are ambulances, 2 of them are fire engines, and those run, as you would understand, on every emergency. We rotate them. We have the tower, which is, again, an emergency asset that is important for a number of areas within the community. And then we have a squad, which is basically, when I arrived, we took it from a kind of quick response vehicle to more of what it was designed for a forestry and a support vehicle. It can't put a number of people in there, and it doesn't have all the equipment as an engine. So we redesigned the response. So then you get into the 3 support vehicles, and for a department our size, it's very lean. There's no reserve capacity. So one is assigned to the fire chief, and as we discussed earlier, it's a marked vehicle, and I take it home, and the responsibility of myself is to respond to emergencies as needed besides fire department business. We have we already spoke about the Explorer. That was initially the fire chief's car when I arrived. The previous administration believed that I think he lived a little further away and had a different approach to response and command and control of incidents. So that was, unfortunately, it's undersized, underpowered, and kind of ill-equipped. And I think we had these conversations earlier about trying to retrofit that vehicle, and I don't think that's money worth spent. The next vehicles that we just talked about was the pickup. It's a 2008 F-350. If you've ever visited the fire station, we have a number of trailers that we deploy either through SEMA, CERT, or we have a hazmat trailer. There's no way that we could get those to any location without this size pickup. And if we have a fire incident, it will be used to have people respond in, or it will pick up equipment like hose, things that we used on the incident. And as we look forward, that is one of our ways, because it's four-wheel drive, to get access off on the Breakneck Hill Road Conservation Area, the Sudbury trails. We're still evaluating that based on its weight, but that would get us off-road capabilities. And then routing it out, we have a number of, I said, trailers, and then we have a rigid, all inflatable boat and a trailer.
Thank you.
Anything else, Lisa?
All set, thank you.
Any other committee members have questions, comments, thoughts on this specific item?
So if it's not this year, then so next year would be the pickup truck and the other backup command vehicle.
Yes.
And then there also, was it an ambulance that's scheduled for next year too?
We have an ambulance scheduled for, I think, 2023.
Okay.
Again, it's a challenge. We're trying to create a proper replacement schedule. But historically, some things have been purchased in different ways. We're finding the same thing with our protective gear. So I think in the beginning, some things might bunch up a little bit or get a little closer, but the overall goal is to set a pattern of a solid replacement program that's sustainable but equitable. And my other concern, and I'm talking to the police chief, the vehicles that we're looking at continue to rise in cost. And with the COVID, some of the issues right now are availability of new vehicles. A lot of manufacturers have a backlog. So if you went on anybody looking for a car now, you may find that the inventory is pretty tight, and not because they're selling a lot of them, but they just don't exist because plants were shut down. So looking ahead, if all things work perfect and this was approved in July, I'd be looking to try to get one off a lot that met our specifications. If I had the money today, I don't know if I could get the vehicle. So those are going to be some of the challenges. And I don't want to be at a point 2 years from now where I'm asking for $70,000 for a vehicle because the prices have gone up or we can't get them.
Jeff, Joe, anything?
Can we just make sure I'm clear? So this is for the fall, right? Putting it back on, which still in the current fiscal year.
Correct.
Okay.
Because they don't set the tax rate until, if there is going to be a fall town meeting, the tax rate would be set after.
Okay. And if we don't, I think that the comment was, well, you're going to try to put the pickup truck in instead. So there's going to be something on there, regardless of.
I'll clarify, Jeff, it would be my recommendation at least get something, because otherwise we're going to start getting a year where we ask for two.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion. It doesn't mean the capital committee has to support or approve that, but that would be my recommendation, because otherwise I'm going to come next year and say I need two vehicles potentially. And the other area, I know that I think just within context, it's part of a broader picture, but one of the initiatives I embarked on last year was our ambulance revenues, knowing that as your new fire chief, there would be initiatives and expenditures that I would have to request based on where I wanted to bring the department. I know that we're, even with COVID, we've been pretty successful in increasing the revenues. In my mind, it's not a 1-for-1, but I think it was imperative that the department had at least looked at other revenue sources and opportunities to start offsetting some of the initiatives that I would be looking at. So I hope it's evident that I'm making the effort not to put the burden all on the taxpayer based on initiatives I thought were important for this department. So that's why I think some of the approaches I'm taking are at least reasonable based on the environment, because we put some skin in the game and try to offset some things.
Jason, I have one more question.
Sure.
So Chief, so say we have a fall town meeting and we get a chief's vehicle. Does that cost include retrofitting the vehicle with everything that you need in it? And what would be the lead time on a vehicle with what you want or need in it?
Well, we did include the cost of equipping it properly, all the electronics, all the emergency warning systems, and the workspaces. I wish I gave you a straight answer of how long it'd take to get it. Based on my earlier comments, the question would be is what's available? You can go off the Mass State bid list. The question is, are those vehicles available? There may be an opportunity to try to get as close as possible off current inventory by looking for 3 quotes of area dealers to see if they have it, and then taking it to the shop that would put all the electronics, radios, and emergency warning systems in it. I don't know if that would save any money, but I know the police chief has been approved and he's finding some challenges. I've talked to my peers in the district. Some vehicles are hard to get because they stopped making them during this pandemic. So I would do everything I could to try to get that as quick as possible within the budget defined by the committee.
Okay, one more question. Just so, what would your plan be for your current vehicle? Is that going to stay in the fleet or?
So we would keep the 2017 Expedition. That makes sense, and it's again outfitted properly. The question comes up with the Explorer. We own it, so there's no cost on it. The question would be, is as we look forward, does it make sense? Does it have value to trade in? Does it make sense to repurpose it within the department or within the town? I think I'd work with the town administrator. Where does this belong? Does it have value otherwise? I don't think it has a strong trade-in value that could really give us a lot of bang for our buck on. So we're still looking. I'm still trying to project out other vehicle needs. So we'll see what happens. But I don't think if the thought would be to automatically trade in to reduce the cost, I don't think that's a great opportunity right now.
No, I agree. And I'm thinking ahead towards at some point, we're going to be looking for a vehicle for the facilities manager. I mean, I know his car is getting old. There's a lot of upkeep and weighing the costs, so that's kind of where I was going, but thank you.
So Lisa, is that a question? Mark, do you know if there's a vehicle, like we just did the DPW vehicle, is there another vehicle that's due up next year that we could kind of position this for, or the year after? Do you have any idea?
There really isn't that this vehicle would fit into. I think what Lisa just mentioned, the oldest vehicle that we've got otherwise would be the facilities director. It would probably make a natural fit. Normally the vehicles that come down from police and fire do end up either with facilities or with the building commissioner. And sometimes it lines up and sometimes it doesn't. So we end up trading them in. And as the chief says, you really don't get a whole lot for them at that point, but it does get rid of them. I do want to make sure that we stay away from keeping a vehicle and adding a vehicle just for the sake of keeping it in our fleet and having it available maybe in some other department, because what happens is I go away and you go away, and then everybody forgets, and the next thing you know, it's like, well, this vehicle needs to be replaced. We need to replace it with a new vehicle. And nobody remembers it was just kind of an add-on. So that is one thing I just caution us on, and, you know, and kind of putting a vehicle somewhere because it looks nice for now, and then all of a sudden it becomes a necessity down the road.
So I'm looking at the facilities budget right now. I don't see that on there.
So there is no other vehicle the only vehicle acquisitions in the coming year are police cruisers.
Right. I mean, even for the next 4 or 5 years, I don't even see it on there.
No, there's because they've always been hand-me-downs, Jeff.
Okay.
So it hasn't. It's the cost. The full cost of the new one is bared in someone else's budget, usually police.
Okay.
The only other item I thought about with fire prevention car is it may extend the life of your if the chief continues to use the fire prevention car in exactly how it is today, right, and it's just using these command vehicles for command type items or for other department needs as he sees fit, it may extend the life of all of the cars, so to say, other than maybe the one that the chief of the department is driving at any time, which that's, you know, you're always going to have a chief with a town-owned vehicle. Like, that's just always going to be a reality, whoever's in the seat. So I guess I was purposely kind of quiet on it, but have a lot of views on the vehicle. I candidly was not in support of it for the spring town meeting because more on the financial uncertainty and the age of the vehicles that the chief had. The more that I've listened to the chief and thinking through kind of the downstream ramifications of not doing it now, right? And you think about the delays, the cost, and just looking at candidly what he is doing as a chief and thinking back to my time as chair of the fire chief screening committee. You know, one of the things that was really important to the board of selectmen that had appointed us to search for a candidate like Chief Achilles was a chief that was going to be active in response and live locally, be, you know, an asset, right, to, in addition to his approximately 5 men and women that are on each shift, assuming they're running fully staffed in a day. And right, he's doing that. And I think it's imperative on the town to equip him to continue to do it, because otherwise we're candidly paying him to do something that he's not fully equipped to do. I think what I would impress upon the committee, if we're supportive of the overall need, is that we start at once the books kind of close on the year end from last year, which my understanding is pretty imminent. Once we kind of see where the balances are, think through the best way to purchase it. Is it just a simple general fund appropriation and it really isn't going to hit the tax rate because maybe there was offsetting revenue? Do we split the cost given it is a vehicle partially with the ambulance fund? And I'll go into the balance there. But I think we have options, assuming that revenue didn't just plummet, which I haven't heard that happened yet, but I also don't want to vote to support something today and then see revenue plummeted. And, you know, I think the chief would understand that if that was our only objection sort of thing. So I guess, does anyone have, while we have Chief Achilles, I'm not sure we're going to have him back before we take a vote on this. And once we kind of see how the finances are playing up, does anyone have any questions on the vehicle or want to voice, I guess, a lack of support in the next 12 months for the vehicle?
My only question, could you combine the pickup truck and the command vehicle? Could you use the F-350 and equip it for that, or use the Expedition with the trailer hitch to pull the trailers?
As far as the pickup as a command vehicle, because you have to leave the back of the bed open to put equipment in, it typically doesn't support that idea. You'd have to put a cap on a pickup, and then you lose the functionality of large equipment. We did, that's one of the reasons why the Expedition, when they purchased it, was that size, it was capable of towing. Because we have multiple trailers, lighting units, generators, we can't always count on other departments to tow them. Every vehicle that we're going to get from now on will be capable of towing, have the capacity. So right now the Expedition has that capacity. as a backup. And that would be the other important part where the expedition becomes back to prevention and I have an equivalent vehicle, is we could have at any one time 2 vehicles capable of towing. We just could be careful of taking the command vehicle, because you don't want to, the one that's identified for command, you don't want to have towing a trailer somewhere when it needs to be at the incident managing. But moving forward, every vehicle we get will be capable of towing our trailers, because you just don't know when and how you're going to have to move those.
So if you have that, do you still need the pickup truck?
Oh, definitely, because I think the same thing is you have an expedition or you have a pickup and you're going to the dump, or you're going to Home Depot or Lowe's to get stuff. So the same thing for us is you need an open bed vehicle to put a lot of stuff in if you need to go off-road for search and rescue, if you need to go off-road for a forestry incident, a woods fire, or to bring back, hundreds of feet of hose and contaminated equipment from an incident. You need a pickup.
So could you kind of use it as a brush vehicle kind of a thing?
The pickup, we're still looking at that. It does, when you do that, you have to put a pump on it. And it gets really complicated. And now once you put a pump in the back, you lose the capabilities of having it as a hauler, I guess is the best way to say it. So we do have a squad that serves as a forestry. The challenge with that is just the weight. We probably wouldn't take it far off road unless it was secure. If you've been on Breakneck Hill Conservation, probably some areas we could go on, but if you get on the Sudbury Reservoir trails up near the old ice pond, I would be very hesitant to take that squad. And we're even now starting to evaluate, could we get the pickup up there based on its width and weight? That's for future conversation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest issue on the pickup, right, is, and we do live in New England, right? And even though we didn't really have a winter last year, one fire, your hose isn't like a garden hose, right? You can't just wrap it up and put it back in the truck after it's all frozen. So literally, Andrew, they have to literally haul it back in a pickup truck and there's no other vehicle that could haul it back, including the engine that it came on, because of how it freezes. You've all probably seen news footage of how this happens, but it's honestly back-breaking type work to undo what they created at a seam.
And Jason, just to add, and I think it's important, we have a plowing capability with our pickup. It was not to supplant anything that DPW does, by no means, but there are times, and again, we had a very mild winter. If we need to get access with the ambulance up a driveway during a storm, we will staff the pickup as an emergency response plow that would gain access up driveways. So that's another thing I would not want a expedition or a Tahoe or something doing, because you're confused. You're trying to we do it very well as trying to make things multifunctional, but you still have to prioritize what the use is, the primary use of the vehicle.
Jason, if I can, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Palmer.
As you were contending before, though, you think that the pickup will be okay until next year. The only concern is about spreading out the cost of the 2 vehicles. Is your only hesitation?
When I arrived here, the pickup was out of service. It had been, the bed was rotted off. We put a bed on it, a used bed. Our mechanic did a great job in effectively and efficiently and cost effectively managing that. I think it's going to last. Keep my fingers crossed. It's an old vehicle. It doesn't, we say 2008, it doesn't seem that bad. Gets a lot of hard work. It's almost like a construction truck at some point. So it's a balance. I'm prioritizing one approach in the department, knowing that I got to do everything I can to make that pickup last. And that kind of goes to our early conversation. If we start log jamming these, there's going to be a point where I need 2. And I rather spread it out over time. Yeah. But if we don't do anything, I could be here next year saying I need both now. And I don't want to do, I prefer not to do that.
Well, in an as-needed budget, I'm not as worried about paying for it when we absolutely need it, as opposed to, trying to space it at the moment, at least in my concerns. So, if we have to binge buy 2 next year, for me, that's not a problem.
Okay.
I would look at it and say, okay, we need it. If you need it, fine, we need it.
And I appreciate that. I don't know if everybody has that sentiment, but I appreciate that.
I think I would agree with Joe. I wouldn't really have an issue with buying 2, especially because the cost is still less than an ambulance, certainly a lot less than a fire truck. So it's like your per annum capital cost is still less. It's just, you're having to get 2 things at once. But I don't really have an issue with that, especially because the life of one or the other might be longer than,
Yeah,
Something else in the chief's vehicle before we move on?
Yes, just one thing. So I also agree with Joe. I think that's the right approach, but I just wanted to share just a quick thought with the board as well. So I was on the fence initially on the need for a chief's vehicle, but I will tell you, I took part in being a member of the CERT team, the search that was done over on Wildwood, and to actually see the command vehicle in use completely changed my thought process on what was needed and the importance of it. So I would wholeheartedly support the chief's vehicle, get it now, and only because I've now seen the use. I can only imagine in a fire situation when you're trying to do a whole heck of a lot of things, and to have everything in one place and be able to coordinate everybody from one place with everything there is very important. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to finish this, and I think the way to cap the discussion rate is, I think we all too often look at dollar signs of purchase of a capital item, but also don't understand kind of the underlying dollar signs of what that capital item is actually facilitating, right? And obviously, if you have a well-coordinated search or a well-coordinated fire, you're making sure the safety of the people involved is top priority, right? In equipping them the right way. And then the only other thing I'll add to all of this is, I think I may have said it before, things tend to happen in 2s in the fire service. I don't know, Chief, if you would agree with that or not, but you look at call volume data, it doesn't really tell usually the story of how many times like the tone went off for one call, but then a simultaneous call came in. In using a vehicle, much like what the Chief uses myself, I can't tell you how oftentimes I've been responding to one call. I didn't ever end up at that call. I ended up at some other call. There is value to redundancy. I hate redundancy in a lot of areas, but in the fire service, you can't predict when someone's actually going to call for help. So I'm sensing a vote of support here for the chief, absent some very adverse financial situation. But I guess, Chief, if we get to that point, we'll call you back. But otherwise, my plan would be to call a vote once you kind of get the solidified numbers from Mark and Brian, and obviously the outlook, because I think if we do have the ability to do it in the fall, the outlook for the next couple of years is not as good.
Right. I appreciate that, and thank you for your questions. It was, if there's anything I can ever answer online or offline, please reach out.
Okay, so Chief, before you go, the other item we had was personal protective equipment fund.
Yep.
And discussion of this. So I'll give a primer. As I started to prepare for how we're going to approach for the next couple of years, one of the things the Chief has on his, in addition to needing SCBAs, which are the air packs they wear on their back, which needs to be replaced all at the same time to create the same system amongst all the trucks. Many of the firefighters' gear expire. They have a 10-year shelf life. Once you hit the 10 years, really, it's a liability for the town. It's no longer meeting standards. The firefighter can't go to the fire academy anymore for any sort of training, et cetera. And now there's a movement, most departments actually do it every 5 years to create like a redundancy in terms of gear, because you go to a fire, you become covered in some sort of contaminated item. That gear needs to be fully washed, deconned, et cetera. That firefighter doesn't have gear until the wash cycle completes, and it's not a typical, I guess, wash cycle that you're all used to with your normal clothing. So the chief had 135,000 for next year, so spring town meeting, and then another 135 2 years down the road. I discussed the idea, and we actually looked at when, like, he did an inventory of every single person in his department's gear, of what like he actually needs next year, and what he needs over the next 3 to 5 years. And we discussed the concept of coming up with like a PPE fund, so much like we do road maintenance every year, much like we do other things, that this become more of a recurring item in the budget, albeit at a much lower cost, but to get his department on the right track. So big picture, if the committee was supportive of bringing this approach forward, it would bring next year's number down from 135,000 to about 40,000. And then you'd have 40,000 the following year, and then somewhere around 25,000 moving forward, absent some major turnover or additional staff, which none of which are in the offing, but it's kind of outside the chief's control at this point. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, because it would get the men and women of the department on what is like a very regular schedule to meet NFPA, which is the governing body, the standards for gear. It phases our capital over time. And it also gives the chief an ability, if he has a firefighter that goes into a fire today and their gear is compromised, which happens, he has the ability to access this fund, which would have to be created as kind of a separate warrant article at town meeting. And we could help set up what the parameters are. Does the chief have sole authority over it? Is it town administrator? Is it a BOS vote? Something like that. The chief says, firefighter X had their gear compromised. I need to buy him or her a new set today, and here's why. Just give him more flexibility than waiting for kind of these one-time type items. I also thought through, well, some people like to explore grants for these sorts of things. Chief and I were pretty adamant that that's not the right avenue for PPE, because of the cycle that people are on, and the fact that some people are hired this year, some people are hired next year, some people have been on the department for 30 years, right? So there's just not been a natural rhythm to how their gear has been replaced. And this gear replacement item, I think, has gotten a lot more focus in the last 2 or 3 years. Lisa, I know you sat through the chief's assessment center when we hired him, right? And some of the presentations made by him, as well as others vying for the job in terms of cancer in the fire service. So to me, this sounded somewhat of a no-brainer, but maybe I'm being naive in terms of it spreads the capital cost out. It actually may reduce the capital cost over time, but it actually puts the chief in a much better spot, that we're not replacing gear that doesn't need to be replaced, but at the same time, not putting off something critical just because he doesn't have the funding. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts?
Is this an accumulating fund, or is it cap every year that's given to the fire department?
Well, we'd be proposing that they create it. So Mark, help me here a little bit, right? But I would assume there would be some wording in a warrant article that this balance would just roll every year. Like, it would be funded every year by town meeting, right? Town meeting could decide every year how much to fund it by, which in large part should be dictated by the chief looking at his current roster and saying, what do I need? And what could I foresee needing, plus, I'll call it a small buffer. And it would just roll every year, so that if there was 2 or 3 years where you didn't spend it, you build up a balance and maybe not fund it one town meeting.
Yeah, that's correct, Jason. I think, again, the biggest battle that I think you'll have with that, it's a different way of doing things. It's a And town meeting has always been very focused on funding items as they come up and not doing some of this stuff prospectively like this. So it's just a change in the culture. And I think if it's done the right way, it makes a lot of sense.
And
Jason, is this common? Sorry.
go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
Is this common across other towns and municipalities setting up a fund like this?
And I can explain that because we had a lot of success in my previous positions doing this. The problem with purchasing gear all at the same time is, so for Southborough, and this is what they did, which wasn't wrong, is you purchase 30 sets of gear or 20 sets of gear all at one time. It all expires at the same time.
Right.
And NFPA, and I think I sent this out to you folks about some of our capital replacement guidelines of some of the standards. I cannot have anybody in gear that is over 10 years old. If once this expires, it has to go out of service. It's not optional, and creates a lot of liability if anybody gets injured or hurt in gear. And now it's not just the protective coat and pants, it's the boots, it's the gloves, and it's the helmet. They all have a standard that they have to meet. So if you buy it all at one time, basically that's why you see a request for $135,000 coming up, is we have to replace it all at the same time. And it doesn't create some, as Jason mentioned, you have somebody leave, you have somebody new come on. So if I have a number of people have been on 5 years or less. If I buy it all in 2 years, I just bought them gear they didn't need. Where if you create a cycle of putting them on a replacement schedule, the best one is every 5 years you get a new set of gear, so that you have a brand new set and a reserve set, and that just rotates. To get into that cycle, I spoke to Jason and said that the best way to do it is next year we need 10 sets of gear. Then the year after that, we need 10 sets of gear. And we never really identified a replacement schedule for our call members, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to implement that. So what we're hoping to do is over the next 3 years, start to get into that cycle and then fund it so that we can create a 5-year cycle for everybody. So it might take a little bit, and to the point of, and I think in support of what Mark's saying is, we may find that once we get into the cycle, we might be able to do something where 1 year it doesn't have to be as high, or a couple of years, but we have some in reserve in case somebody's gear is damaged. It does get inspected every year. So if it's inspected, it comes out of service, and it can't be repaired, I have to take it out of service. It's about $4,000 a set. So I've had great success in spreading this out, but most departments get grants, or they make one big purchase, and then that really hamstrings them in a good replacement program. By funding it regular basis, I think it's a much more effective and efficient way, and it's more sustainable.
Can you set up a fund and also try to go through a grant cycle and use that for match?
The challenge with grants is that typically they provide grants for structural firefighting gear in departments that have not been able to replace their gear or don't have second sets. So in the priority in I can't tell you what the federal firefighting grants are going to be in the future, but basically they look at same thing with our air packs, is you do them all at once or not. So they'll fund the whole package. They won't fund a revolving account, nor will they fund portions. And right now, we have put in a grant for our self-contained breathing apparatus, which will be, I think, just shy of $300,000, maybe $270,000. So I'm trying to put all my effort in getting that. But again, when I submitted that grant, it's all or nothing. You can't say I want 10, or I want to do it over a 5-year cycle. PPE, they won't do it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
I think for at least the next three or so years while that SCBA item is pending, unless obviously you get notification today that you got it, right? That seems like where your grant activity is going to focus, at least from AFG, which is the firefighting grant cycle. Obviously, there could be other grants that come out outside of that you would look at. So, is there any other discussion on this?
So Jason, my thought is I don't love the idea of the fund. I would much prefer to set up a leasing or a renting program. I mean, you can lease SCBA just like you can lease any other piece of equipment.
So I'm talking about the gear.
Yeah, the gear. Lease the gear. So you're just financing it over the 5 or 10 year period every one, or rent it. I think that's
How can you lease it though if after 10 years though they can't use it again? So what do you?
Yeah, so you basically you're financing it. Leasing is financing, but it's a better rate. So you would just over 10 years, and then after 10 years you would own it and get rid of it. But that would allow you to basically put into Chief Achilles' budget a certain amount of lease payments or debt service, and he can lease up to that amount, and he can swap things out, add more, do whatever he wants. But it basically gives him the flexibility to lease, basically have a line of credit for leasing, and he would basically be purchasing the items, but it would be kind of like bonding it, but not having to actual bond it.
Okay.
So basically give Chief Achilles the budget to do it, but it's not a revolving fund where it gets tricky and you have to have, it would just be part of your regular operating budget, and you would basically have a leasing budget to buy and purchase things, and it would just be financed over the period or the life of the equipment.
So one thing I'll mention, I love the chief and I trust him, but I don't want to start putting, these individual pieces in various budgets either. So we've got to figure, if we're going to do something like this, we've got to figure out where, where we put this inside the budget.
But I certainly like the idea of buying them separately or buying them individually, but kind of having a leasing program or a renting program would allow you to do that without creating the fund, which then, police wants a fund, or DPW wants a fund, or rec wants a fund, and now we have all these funds, and it just becomes a nightmare.
More of earmark's probably not the right word, but it's basically earmarking. It's much like what Karen does with the road maintenance every year, right? The town decides, is it 300, is it 325, or 400,000? And it gets earmarked specifically for roads. It doesn't actually go into a true fund, right? It just carries over year to year. So I guess what we need to decide today is, are we supportive of spreading these costs out? And if we are, then we can figure out the right mechanism to do it, because we need to update the capital plan to reflect 40,000 for next year, not 135,000, right? And spread that out, and then figure out, is it leasing? Is it a separate fund? And have a further conversation about that once we have kind of maybe all the options on the table. And Andrew, maybe that's something for if you believe in the leasing idea on this concept, bring it back, because I personally would like to see, well, how much added, I'll call it financing fees, are we then paying for that when we probably have the cash on hand through normal appropriations to pay for something like this? I mean, this is something that's normally just funded directly through the tax rate.
Are we actually doing two things here? Wouldn't we be spreading out the fund, but also committing to buying 2 sets of gear? Is that correct? Over the 10 years?
Over 10 years, yes.
So I think, I'm perfectly on board with spreading everything we possibly could spread. With the rates they are today, we should be spreading as much as we can.
Chief, is it fair to say that we're buying 2 sets of gear, or is it more fair to say that we're staggering out gear replacement?
I think I hate to say it's both. We're gonna spread out the replacement program so that it lines up with a good schedule of the gear, so that everybody has 2 sets. So I think it's important to know, like today's crew, and we typically have culled together a second set for everybody over the last couple of years. So right now in the station, duty crew working right now has their primary set that they're using right now, and they have a set in reserve that's ready to go. If they come back from a fire, and it could be a car fire, it could be a woods fire, it could be a structure fire, that gear needs to be decontaminated and washed. Until that point, they cannot wear somebody else's gear. They have to wear their own fitted set, so it's a second set. If we weren't having that, they would be out of service, and I would be paying people overtime to stand by while their gear got dried and washed. So the best practice from the NFPA and Department of Labor are 2 sets of gear. That I just don't want to have 2 sets that expire at the same time, because that means every time I would be asking for 270,000. I don't want to do that. I want to spread it out over time and get the most out of that as we can.
So this is also an emergency ready cost.
Yeah,
Got
if
it.
we don't have the gear, the people can't work. I mean, and if it expires, and I don't think we want to, you wouldn't want the fire chief to support that, and nor do I think anyone wants to support that we have people not working because their gear's expired.
So you just need a new set every 5 years, and then when the previous one becomes the backup, and you just
That's the goal, and it's. I know we're going to front load this again a little bit because it wasn't on a cycle. It is a change, but I think it's more predictable and sustainable than the method of just buying bulk gear at one time. It will get everybody on a pretty good schedule with some flex. I think if it's earmarked, the only flexibility I think that it provides is we just put on 2 new people last year. That's 2 sets we wouldn't have to get later. So we might be able to, it may fluctuate from 40 to 25 over time if we get in a good cycle. So I think this would be a better approach, but if we don't do it, I will still need $135,000 next year.
Okay. So I am going to move that this committee support a replacement program for the fire department, turnout gear, and other PPE related expenditures to be further analyzed in terms of purchase versus lease. There a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Bath,
Aye.
Malinowski, aye. And Chief, I'll leave you on a good note. I know you alluded to it earlier, but I specifically had ambulance fund on here. We have been tracking it very closely as a capital committee, and I wanted to report out to the committee the receipts for FY20, so the year that just ended on 6/30, were approximately $540,000. The receipts for FY19, so before Chief Achilles' arrival, were $400,000. So the changes that he has made to billing policies, billing rates, et cetera, have, I'll call it, yielded us some flexibility as we look to, obviously some significant capital needs coming from his department, but let's also not forget that approximately 275 to 290,000 of this fund every year gets swept back up to cover right back up into the general fund, right? So this isn't all funding fire department type operations. So kudos, Chief, to you and your department, because I know it takes a lot of effort from both the administrative staff, but also the crews on the street to get the right information to actually collect on this stuff. And hopefully we see that trend continue, although I'm sure you're not going to promise us another $140,000 increase this year.
No, and I'll echo that, is that we implemented some strategies, but it takes the staff and the members of the department to be very attentive to the policies we implemented so that we have a higher collection rate. Again, just because we increase rates doesn't mean you always get them. And we're still flexible for those people that have some challenges paying. Most of this revenue came from insurance companies. So it's not something that's coming out of people's pockets. We'll watch what happens this year, knowing there's some pressures on people. There's other strategies we can employ, but we'll wait. But I was very pleased that the initiatives that we implemented, again, go back to, I can't ask for things or look for initiatives if we haven't made some opportunities to offset those a little bit. So I think it's lining up for and being positive for both the department and the town. So thank you.
All right, anything else for the chief?
Thank you,
Do we have-
Chief.
Do we have any insight? Sorry, not to keep going down this, but how much of that is volume driven versus rate driven?
Our volume is pretty consistent to what it was last year. So it's not purely volume. When I got here, we had a pretty good collection rate. You know, I thought we were going to get hit kind of hard in March, April, and May. So we could have maybe done a little better. But it goes to a good example is motor vehicle accidents. Just the simple fact of ensuring that we get the motor vehicle accidents insurance information. That's a pool of money that everybody wants that's involved. And if we can bill it early, we get a bigger share. So one, our rates went up, but also our way that we get the information and process the information is better. So I think this was a good conservative number of having that increase. But if we start getting busier, we should see a little increase, but it's typically a percentage of the volume that you'll get a good return on.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thanks, chief.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day and be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
All right. South Union School. So at our last discussion, we talked about how to proceed with this one. Since that, Jeff and myself have gathered some costs from John Parent in terms of the ongoing operations. It costs about $35,000 a year to operate and maintain that building. That's without any future capital, and that does not include any property insurance on the building. I don't think we've been able to ascertain yet what the actual cost to maintain that building from an insurance perspective is. I think the general sense of the committee was that this is something we should at least explore the options on. But obviously there are procedural items that this very quickly gets punted to BOS into town meeting to have those sorts of discussions. So where I was going to recommend we go with this, if the committee is on board, that based on everything we've heard to date about this building, that we explore the options further, was one, we make a recommendation to that effect to the BOS and let them decide whether they want to meet with us in open session or executive, depending upon the strategy that they're planning to use. Two, get some sort of appraisal around the property to understand what the true value of it is. And three, start preliminary discussions with the two departments, Recreation and Youth and Family, about if that building was not available, what sort of space they would need, both short-term and long-term. I think we've heard from Recreation pretty loud and clear on their views of the space in one of our initial meetings. We very candidly have not talked to Youth and Family about it because they don't have capital needs that they would typically come in front of us. But I think it's just the right thing to do, is to kind of talk through short and long-term plans in terms of space, et cetera. So those were my thoughts. But if we're not interested in doing that or think it's too premature, but I don't know how else to advance it other than doing that. That's my view. Doesn't mean we're going to do something. It just means we need to take to kind of the next level.
I think it should be discussed.
Yeah, I think your point too is probably the most critical. The appraisal.
Mhm.
Well, then we also have the senior center. We also have senior center concerns that may be added into that for the future too.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it goes hand in hand too of what do we do with the schools or Woodward, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah, so let's play out a scenario where let's just say the schools say there's absolutely no space, et cetera, and I will provide an update from the school perspective a little later on. But you know, I think we also need to think about, like, is that building core to the town's operations? Like, if we're not going to get any space within schools, is there room for these departments in other town-owned buildings? But candidly, are there open office space in town that could be used in almost rented? Right? If, you know, like for example, public safety has to be in the center of the town. It's core to the, right? We all want it in the center of town so that there's somewhat of an equal response rate. These other departments, they just need to be in town, right? But while we want to make it as convenient as possible, there's no requirement for it to be in a certain spot. And obviously, South Union is about as south in town as you can get right now. Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the line of thinking. It's even if the schools don't offer up any space or don't have any space down the road, should we still be holding on to this building?
Yeah, no, I like the rental idea. There's a lot of open rental property in town.
So I guess point of reference, and I don't work in the appraisal area, so I don't know, but the town property card has it appraised at about 1.6 million. So that would be the value from the appraiser, sorry, the assessor in town. Obviously, there's no taxes paid on it, so query how much goes into actually coming up with that value. But there's obviously a lot of considerations that an outside appraiser would take into, you know, obviously the building needs to be historically maintained, at least the facade, based on the historic designation. When you think through, there's a playground there that's not too old, right? What would happen? Like, that's something for recreation, I think, to think through. But I think we want to have kind of all the pros and cons listed out, and I don't, you know, have that list that I could candidly articulate without doing some further work. But I think it goes, we've hit that point where our community can only do so much without kind of the support of at least BOS, that this would be something, because they would ultimately have to bring it forward to town meeting to get the authorization. And I'd want to know what they want to see as well.
Yeah, I think bring it to BOS, especially to bring in a commercial real estate appraiser that'll do a highest and best use estimate, basically looking at it from what if we made this into condos, made it into retail space, blah, 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 mixed use. They'll look at the different uses and they'll find out, you know, what the most value is there. And then that, you know, gives the town the ability to start to assess some options.
And you could also bring the affordability key in. I mean, there's an elevator there. There's plenty of opportunity there for whomever, whatever. I'm going to try not to say too much because you're going to bring this to the board. So I'll kind of hold off my best that I can. I'll hold off on commenting further.
Yeah, so I will move then that the committee authorize the chair to approach the Board of Selectmen to discuss potential alternatives related to the South Union School, including obtaining an appraisal on the property. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
I would just say, Jason, I think that would be covered under the purview of that money that we had allocated to whatever the 35,000. I think that would certainly be an appropriate use of that. So the funds are available.
Duly noted. Any further discussion? All right, roll call. Braccio,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Right.
Bath,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Next item is vehicle acquisition. So it's come up in many meetings. Andrew actually already alluded to it during the PPE discussion about whether we should be leasing certain vehicles. He had a little bit of a homework assignment. I don't know if you're fully done with it, Andrew, but this is your opportunity to share any thoughts we should be considering, or what further support you need from the committee?
Yeah, sure. So, I dug into it a little bit and talked to some people that I know that do it. Got some information on some of the rates and what, so basically what can be leased is basically any personal property. So you could do computers, office equipment, furniture, vehicles, heavy equipment, telephone and communication equipment, heating and air conditioning, energy management equipment. So a lot of the capital things that we're doing in terms of buying stuff like the library, EMS system, and the HVAC, the SCBA stuff, all the vehicles we're doing, all that could be leased. And then basically they're full payout leases. So they're basically, you're financing the full amount over the course of that. We still own title to them. But some of the rates are, for like a hook truck, we'd probably do 7 years, fire truck, 10 years, police or other vehicles are usually 5 years. They put the funds into like an escrow account. They also do for fire trucks, will prepay, because you usually get a better deal from the fire truck manufacturers. If you prepay, you'll get a discount, but they will do that. But a 5-year rate is 1.95% right now, 7 years, 2.1, and a 10 years, 2.35, which last time I talked to Brian sounded like better than what we were getting for bond rates, but obviously the market has shifted. So, but it certainly sounds pretty much in a line to what rates we would expect from a bond, or we should expect from a bond, but I don't know if we're getting them. But it's certainly a lot less work to have to put the bond issuance together and all the paperwork and approvals, and to get approval from town meeting to do the bonds.
So, Andrew, can you so let's use the pumper that was just approved at town meeting.
Yep.
$600,000. I think the way we're at least carrying the cost now, and it's subject to whatever Brian officially does with the bonds, was it was gonna be over a 10-year time period.
Correct.
So if the town decided that leasing was better there, right, a better option, what does that look like at the end of year 10? Is it like a lease to own sort of thing?
Yeah. So you actually, it's a full payout. So it's the same as doing a bond. You're just basically, you're taking the 600,000, dividing it by 10, and then your interest rate. And so the town would be the lien holder on the insurance and that kind of thing. So that it would be, you just have to do some stuff with the insurance like you would with a leased vehicle.
Jason, if I may.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So Andrew, again, I'm not as familiar with leases. That's, I have a basic understanding. So can we'll use the $600,000 truck again. What
Yep.
would be the true benefit to the taxpayers versus lease versus, bonding over time and then owning at the end? So I'm just trying to understand the relation as to what we really gain by leasing.
So it could be a lower interest rate, and it's also usually a lot less paperwork. So the actual bond prospectus, I mean, they can be, I think the fire safety one was a 40-page document. So it's just a very thorough, and basically once you get these programs established and you have something set up with, whatever the financing institution, it's pretty easy to just add on additional pieces of equipment because they already have your financials and they already understand what the town's doing. You could even get like approved for like a line, and then you basically have draws on that as you want to add pieces of equipment.
If we own it at the end,
Yep.
either way.
Correct.
So I'm kind of struggling to understand this a little bit. So if we own it at the end anyway, there's no costs at the end, no additional costs at the end.
Correct.
Like if you lease a car and you bring the car back and it's got X number of miles and you go over, what are the extra fees that may be tacked on at the end that we're not necessarily seeing at the beginning when we decide to go down this path based on the lower interest rate?
There's none, because you own the asset at the end. So you're not returning a vehicle. You're not paying on a vehicle lease. You pay the residual. So you pay the vehicle price was $50,000, and the residual at the end of it, it's worth $30,000. So you're paying the $20,000 in vehicle depreciation. But then you're returning a $30,000 vehicle. The problem is when you return a vehicle that doesn't have is damaged or whatever, then you owe money. But with this, it's basically financing. So they call it leasing because technically that's how you have to structure it from a tax perspective.
Okay.
The other benefit of these, and I hope we don't ever have to do anything with it, is that it's subject to every year's appropriation, technically. So you could, if the town actually got into a bad, dire financial strait, get out of the lease. So there's a clause in there that says you have to bring it for appropriations, and it has to be voted down, and the town has to be kind of in financial straits. But that's how they becomes you get the tax benefit of that, because it's really like a 1-year financing, but it has to be appropriated as part of the budget approval every year in order to get that municipal tax benefit.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Sure.
Do we know what the cost issuance is? Or the cost of issuance for bonds is?
I don't remember. I mean, one, there's a lot of people time. It's a lot of time to put together the prospectus. I'm not sure what the bond company, we'd have to probably talk to Brian and get the pieces on there. I'm happy to do that if the committee wants me to.
I was just seeing if anybody knew what the round out percentage or paperwork cost was.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it really comes down to rates, time, and also now having the flexibility that if there's a financial situation that we could get out of it if we really needed to.
Yeah, but on something like 600,000, if we were looking at rates alone, that would be usually the issuance cost is an X. It's like a mortgage. You're buying, it's basically points. I mean, you're paying it sort of invested to get the interest rate.
Yeah,
so,
but the bonding smaller items is where you get into the amount of. It's almost the same amount of work to bond, say, a $40,000 pickup truck as it is a $600,000 fire engine. Right. So it's one of those where it's just the time and cost and that kind of thing. It's an issuance. It's an issuance.
Well, I'm wondering if as part of the committee, it'd be worth having a meeting with one of the bond issuing agents for the town.
Yes.
Just so we fully understand, not just for this project, but sort of over the scheme for the town in the future, that we all have an idea of voting on these lease plans and other things as to whether we'd be better off floating a financial plan, including standard issuances of bonds every year that would cover a whole host of capital items. And if we put them together, maybe we get a better rate for issuance. Correct. That's all I'm.
Yeah, the more money you can put into it, obviously, too, the more the better rate you get.
Andrew,
hang on, can I just, I saw Mark come off mute, Lisa, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I know there is obviously some sensitivity to obviously what the role is of the treasurer in town and the authority he is given, via, I think probably statute and, annual bonding authority, I guess. Mark, I know because Brian isn't here today. What would be helpful to you, while respecting obviously their, what authority and practices you've historically done? I know you have a financial advisor, but I also think obviously we're all looking for new ways of thinking, right? Which is what Andrew's introducing here. Like what would be helpful to you and your team to further assess it? Is it having a discussion more broadly in this meeting? Is it giving, having a member like Andrew meet with you and Brian and look at, maybe some of the items we know we're going to be bonding here in the short term? Maybe this pumper, I think, is a great example, to be honest, in terms of like what a lease would look like, what a bond would look like, because obviously we have some time to figure that out, given there's no payment due until next fiscal year. I don't know, just any initial reactions to what you've heard.
So yeah, that's a really loaded question, Jason. I think you need to make sure you've got the expertise in the room, and obviously with Brian not here today, he really can't speak to some of those things. I know that we had a conversation with our financial advisor about a bond issuance closing out the public safety project, and we were talking about rates. And at this point, the bond issuances that they're seeing for communities, that are, several millions dollars at this point are well under 1% at this point. And, there's some refinancing of earlier issuance opportunities where we can save a little bit of money too. Obviously, when we get projects, we don't automatically go out to bond, for projects. We'll wait. And I think, I forget if Andrew alluded to it or who alluded to it, but we wait until we have, probably, maybe $8 to $10 million worth of projects, $7 to $10 million worth of projects, and do one large bond. So we'll float those bonds, until that time. But one of the things I may suggest too is our financial advisor from Hilltop Securities. She has come and spoken with advisory in the past to talk about, how the bonding works and things like that. It may be a good idea to have Mary come and schedule a time with this committee, just to kind of answer some questions and go through some things. And little education's not a bad thing, just to understand. And she can speak to the pros and cons and some of the things that Andrew's bringing up too, as to whether it may be a good path for the town to consider.
Great.
I don't know where that background noise is coming from. Is anyone speak? No one's speaking,
Sounds
right?
Sounds like a scanner.
I
I think it's Lisa.
was like, the chief's not on anymore.
No.
I don't have anything near me. So here's what I would suggest. Mark, I think, and I can coordinate with Kathy on this, maybe just a joint meeting so that Mary doesn't have to do that twice between advisory and capital committee.
Well, she's already done it with advisory, Jason, in the past.
Oh, but how long ago? Like Andrew, were you a member of advisory when? So,
No.
so that's what I'm saying, Mark, is I think you've got a lot of turnover. You've got obviously a new committee here, and you've got a lot of turnover in advisory in the last couple of years. So
No, I agree. So if you want to coordinate with Brian, Jason,
okay.
as to scheduling that, I think that that'd be appropriate. She was happy to come in and have those conversations. So I don't think that's an issue.
So I think that would be my proposed action item 1. Action item 2 is, Andrew, I would suggest when Brian's back, like
Yep.
look at the pumper, right? Assume we were bonding it today, right? And you two work up what the leasing would look like and what the bond would look like, just for that one item. I get Mark's point about we add things together in bonding, but I think we're gonna have to make a decision on that item in the next year. Not we, this group, but obviously the town, in the appropriate people. I think that's a good case study, or potentially also looking at, we've got 2 police cruisers slated this year, where like that might be another item, or the chief's vehicle. Like think about maybe some of these smaller vehicle type items plus the pumper.
Yep. Or the hook truck.
I don't know. I'm a very numerically oriented person. If I the numbers may just make a lot of sense, or they may be say, it depends on these 3 factors for it to actually matter.
Yeah.
Because then at least we can make a recommendation. Our recommendation may fall on deaf ears, but I think, at least if we're making recommendations and thinking outside the box, I'm sure people will listen.
Correct. Yeah, I think what I found out is that roughly on average, leasing's about 50 bips higher than bonding, but there's less overhead and issuance costs, et cetera, and some flexibility. So it's really more.
I would hope, Brian, when you sit with Brian on that specific piece, the bond premiums that the town has seen, like I know on public safety, for example, the bond premium on the first year on that big chunk, it basically paid for our principal payment that year. I have that right, Mark?
Yep.
Yes.
So like that we have to also make sure is factored into how these numbers flow out, depending on. I just don't know enough how Brian thinks about when he bonds like these vehicles that are longer term. But we obviously have hook lift coming. We already have appropriated the pump, and we clearly have more fire type items coming down the road here. The other thing I would say to that, Andrew, is if there are other municipalities doing this, that like we can either share what their thought process was. I love being a trailblazer, but I'm not sure I want to chart that water like without like hearing, oh, maybe some other town did it and loves it and here's why, or they did it and they have reservations for these type of items. I mean, I think those are the 3 ways we move this forward.
Yeah, I think Grafton recently did one of their fire trucks. Maybe I'll reach out to them and see what if I can get some information from them.
Any other questions on vehicle acquisition? All right, I'm going to combine 8 and 9 together, which are the updates to the capital plan and the detailed review. I'm not planning to do the detailed review piece today, given where we're at on schedule. But what I am planning to do is, what I would like to do is, 1, update you on how those changes came about. 2, make sure the format that everyone's getting it in is working to your needs. And then what I would do in our next meeting is actually take a formal vote on the changes that were proposed by department heads. All were, to be very clear, all were either pushing items out that aren't ready for prime time yet, or removing items altogether. They were all positive in nature and start to narrow down kind of some of the decisions we're going to have to make. But I think maybe 2 minutes on my process to date. I asked Mark and Brian for a 5-year outlook just to make sure that nothing changed. They gave me some very rough numbers because there's obviously a lot of moving pieces and a lot of parties that need to see that information as well. And the pieces that jumped out to me were how much capital in debt payments were increasing over the next couple of years. So what I did was I just focused on the next 2 years, just short term, saying, what are the major projects that are coming? You can see this in the pivot table that we have in our capital plan that we've been referring to, if you kind of toggle between the next 2 years. And thus far, I got feedback from fire, I got feedback from facilities, and I got feedback from recreation. All of which either push things way out because they shouldn't have been this early in the plan, or they consolidated items or moved some items around. I had a preliminary discussion with the DPW director, and she is working up some changes to how she thinks about her vehicles in more thinking through how to get more from the same vehicle as opposed to just replacing a vehicle, because we've had it, similar to Mark's comment earlier, not just replacing vehicles because we've had it for 20 years and that's the thing we should do. So we may be looking at higher costs for acquisition, but more utility, so less vehicles over time, which I think makes, so she's thinking through what her options and permutations of that are. So I expect she'll have that to me for our next meeting. So what my plan was is, once we have that, we'll have a crystal clear picture of what's on the horizon for next year. My goal is by, I'll call it October, and maybe even before a special town meeting for the fall, that this committee has taken a hard view and a hard vote on at least 90% of the items, right? There are gonna be some that are no-brainers that just have to be done, right? And we need to find a way to fund the cost. There will be some that we may be on the fence about, and there may be some that we just think need to be put off. But what I think the committee also needs to start to do is, as you look to next year's, and you think about the environment that we're currently in terms of pandemic, uncertain financial territory, depending on where we landed FY20, right? And how much is rolling into FY21, are there items that can be done for less if we appropriate them at a fall town meeting and use free cash, or some other mechanism that doesn't change the rate from what people essentially voted on in the spring? Get them off our capital plan, but accomplish it at a fraction of the cost. For example, one of the items you'll see is John Parent had been carrying $175,000 for some interior renovations to the townhouse. That's been knocked down to $80,000 because of the combination of, you know, we're in a pandemic world where the building isn't being used the same way, you know, at least in the short term, but also, you know, access to the building and the current labor he actually has on staff and what they're doing. So that was actually refreshing to me, that as awful as all of this has been, right? We need to also rethink how what the right time is to do some of these things. As you prepare for the next meeting, I'd ask that you kind of think through some of those projects, like depending upon where we land, and hopefully by the time we have the next meeting, we kind of know where the town landed, and where local aid may or may not be falling out, and whether Mark and Brian were too conservative, not conservative enough, right? That will kind of guide some of the discussions. That was kind of the general premise of where I would like to go in the next couple of meetings, is look at those projects. And if there are ones, as you look at them, say, gosh, I really think it'd be helpful to have the department head on, I'll obviously invite him or her, depending on who it is. And then I think Karen will come back regardless, because I think there's a lot going on in her specific area, even outside of this transfer station study that we're doing. And I think one thing that I know we'll discuss is how we think about road maintenance going forward, sidewalks, et cetera. There's a lot of road type projects, and whether we start to bundle some of that stuff together and appropriate all at once, as opposed to the current mechanism. Again, are we good with the current approach, or is there a better way to do it? And so that's kind of where we're going. That's what my process has been to date. So I guess what I'd like feedback from the committee on in our final minutes is, does that process make sense? Is it what you would expect me to kind of be doing to help facilitate these discussions? And two, is there anything else on the actual capital plan and the reconciliation that you want to see to enable a detailed discussion at the next meeting?
I think I'd like to hear from the schools, probably, because they have a lot of big ticket items too.
I will come back to schools.
Yeah.
Been purposely, I'll give you an update on that.
I know they're really busy, but they
Yes.
got a lot going on. I'm just, they have some really big items.
It fits into everything else, right? It's kind of the linchpin to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and then the other thing is with rates at historic lows, spending money now and at a lower, fixing it into a lower rate or lower bond issuance isn't necessarily a bad idea. I know people are trying to not spend as much, but.
Well, I think also looking out in the next 18 months, having some shovel-ready projects might be well advised, considering we may go through, changing government and see some different types of funds available.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with Joe's comment. I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think BOS had to act pretty quickly on sidewalk project, right? That if it wasn't shovel ready, the state wasn't going to entertain. And I know that's hopefully in the works for a grant, but
Yep.
If it wasn't shovel ready, you wouldn't have even been able to discuss if I had heard that conversation correctly.
Right, and Carolyn Dykem has also, at one of her update meetings to the Board of Selectmen, has said there is monies out there, but you need shovel-ready projects. When a little bit of money shows up, it's those that have things ready to go that get those funds. So, Joe, again, I agree. I think it's a great thing to start thinking about and getting things ready, that, if the opportunity presents itself, we can take advantage of it.
And we already lost that one sidewalk. Well, we were talking about changing the sidewalk project already, so.
Any other feedback? Then I'll answer Andrew's question on schools. I'm not purposely not answering it, but you'll understand why in a second. All right, so I have had very short emails back and forth with the superintendent. I have candidly not been able to get his attention. I do not fault him at all, but he at least did give us the capital plan as they currently have it, which is what's reflected in the documents that you all have. I am going to speak with the chair of the Southborough School Committee in the next week. That's Roger Challen now, who has worn many hats in this town over time. What my goal in the conversation, I don't know whether or not he will share the same goal, is to figure out how best to advance the discussion on capital. If obviously Greg and his team are very tied up with, all the unforeseen circumstances that have been sent their way, is there a subgroup that we can be working with just to start dialogue, et cetera? Just to put a framework together of for future sort of discussion. So my goal on the next meeting is to either have some member of the Southborough School Committee join us, or have an update of how best they would anticipate we work together, because obviously it is an answer we've been seeking since April. But I've also treaded very lightly, to be completely honest, given what I know they're dealing with. So with that, I think what I would propose is I'll circulate, once I have that conversation, I will circulate some potential meeting date options. My guess it's going to be about 2 to 3 weeks out, where we could talk about schools, we can talk about DPW, other than transfer station. And then we would have a meeting late August, early September with John Butler specific to transfer station, which I'm gonna get some dates from him here shortly, making sure he's on track. And we would also use that next meeting to discuss and vote, if needed, on any of the changes that the department heads have sent through to date. I think it would be good to get in a good rhythm of, if anything changes in the capital plan, there's a vote at the next meeting, even if it's brought forward by a department head, because right, some department heads may be too conservative, right, and think they're doing the right thing by pushing something out to be, I'll call it the good citizen, but maybe it's not the right interest in the town. Like you've used the example of Chief Achilles earlier, you know, how much is that vehicle going up every year in cost by waiting, and what is there a point at which there's a diminishing return by pushing something out? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so plan on meeting schedule will be that I will circulate some proposed dates for just a general committee meeting in August and a specific meeting on the transfer station, which likely may be joint with advisory, Public Works Planning Board, and BOS, to the extent that those chairs choose to co-post, because I think John should only do it once, right? So either those committees will have to watch it on their own or participate in the meeting. That will be late August, early September. I'll obviously avoid Labor Day type timeframe and start of school type dates. Are there any limitations on anyone's schedule?
No.
Okay. Obviously, if you think of something after, just shoot me an email. With our waning minutes, any public comment? Seeing none, does anyone have any other business? All right, I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Bath,
Aye.
Malinowski, aye. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.